I was searching for firewood, said the rancher. Found 3 Apache women in an old shack. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. James Whitmore had lived alone for years. A rancher in the heart of the American West, his days were spent in solitude, tending to his land, mending fences, and maintaining his ranch house. The rugged mountains that surrounded him were the only company he kept. He had his reasons for avoiding people. The loss of his wife, Anna, and the disappearance of his young daughter had made him withdraw from society completely. He had no desire to interact with anyone, especially not after the tragedy that had shattered his family. James wasn't a man to speak much, but his actions spoke volumes. His life had been reduced to routine, a series of monotonous tasks that kept him busy but left him with an empty heart. It had been years since he had felt the warmth of another person's presence or heard the sound of a child's laughter. His ranch was a place of silence, where the only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees, the hooves of his horse, and the occasional cry of a hawk in the sky. One chilly morning, after an early breakfast of black coffee and stale bread, James saddled his horse and set out to gather firewood for the coming winter. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow over the land as he rode through the dense forest that bordered his property. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that nipped at your cheeks and made you pull your coat tighter around you. As he rode deeper into the woods, James's thoughts wandered back to the days when he had a family. He could almost hear Anna's voice calling to him from the house, the sound of their daughter's footsteps running across the porch. But those days were long gone, lost to time and to the fire that had taken everything from him. His horse moved steadily through the underbrush, the sound of hooves muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. It was then that he noticed something strange. The trees ahead seemed to part slightly, revealing an old shack that James had never seen before. It was hidden from view by the dense forest, almost as if it had appeared overnight. The shack was run down, its walls weathered and its roof sagging, but it wasn't the state of the building that caught James's attention. It was the smoke curling out of the chimney, something no one had done in years. Intrigued, James approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung over his shoulder. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he didn't take chances anymore. As he dismounted and walked toward the shack, he noticed 3 women standing in the doorway. Their eyes were wide with surprise, but there was something else there too, something that James couldn't quite place. They didn't seem like any ordinary travelers. They were dressed in worn but distinctive clothing, the kind of attire worn by the Apache tribes that roamed the land. They were not alone, however. Their expressions revealed a sense of fear, as if they were hiding from something or someone. James hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to react. His life had been filled with cautious solitude, and he wasn't accustomed to dealing with strangers, especially those from a people he had learned to view with suspicion. But something about their presence, their vulnerability, stirred something inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. After a long pause, one of the women stepped forward, her dark eyes locking with his. She spoke in a quiet, almost pleading voice. "We mean no harm. We are just seeking refuge." The sincerity in her words, combined with the desperation in her eyes, made James lower his guard. He had seen enough suffering in his own life to recognize it in others. He nodded, gesturing for them to come inside. But as they stepped past him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here, something he had yet to understand. Little did James know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change everything he thought he knew about himself, the land he lived on, and the people who called it home. I stepped inside the old shack, a place that seemed to have weathered years of neglect. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and the musty smell of damp earth. The 3 Apache women stood silently, their eyes flickering between each other and me. They were trying to hide something, but what? The silence stretched on, hanging in the air like a heavy blanket. The youngest woman, no more than 20, broke the stillness with a quiet voice. "Thank you for letting us stay." Her words were simple, but there was something behind them that made me uneasy. The way she spoke was calm, but her eyes told a different story. She was frightened, as if the very act of being in this place had drawn unwanted attention. The older woman, who appeared to be in her 40s, kept her gaze lowered. Her face was worn, lined with the struggles of a life lived in constant survival. I could see the scars of her people in the lines of her face, each one telling a story of loss and battle. The third woman, the one who seemed to be the leader, stood at the back of the shack, her arms crossed over her chest. She had an air of authority about her, even though she had the same worn look as the others. "We have nowhere else to go," she said, her voice steady but full of a quiet strength. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't just a place to rest they were seeking. It was something much more. I could feel the tension in the air, a sense that their presence here was not just a chance encounter. As I set about preparing a small meal, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. The women settled into the corners of the shack, their bodies tense as if they were waiting for something. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in the room apart from our breathing. As the meal was prepared, I began to ask them questions, but each answer seemed evasive, as if they were reluctant to share too much. The youngest woman spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have been running for days." I stopped what I was doing, my gaze snapping to her. "Running from what? From who?" The answer came from the older woman, her voice rough as if it had been used too many times. "From those who would see us gone. From the men who believe we have no place here." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the pain and anger hidden behind her calm exterior. I didn't know what they had done, or why they were being hunted, but I could see that their struggle was far from over. I set the plates down in front of them, and for a moment, the tension in the room eased as they began to eat. But the silence was still there, hanging over us like a dark cloud. The leader of the group finally spoke again. "We have something to offer you in return for your kindness," she said. I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. "What could you possibly have to offer?" I asked, my voice laced with doubt. The woman's eyes flickered to the door, as if she were checking for something. "We come from a people who know the land better than anyone else. We have skills, knowledge that could be useful to you." She paused, and then added, "But there is more. Something that will change the way you see this land. Something that will change everything for you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I was about to ask her what she meant when a noise outside the shack stopped me cold. The sound of horses, of hooves pounding the ground, drawing closer. My heart skipped a beat as I looked towards the door, then back at the women. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable. I moved quickly to the window and peered outside. Shadows moved in the darkness, figures approaching with purpose. My mind raced. Who were they? Were they coming for the women? Before I could react, the door creaked open, and the leader of the women stood up, her body tense, ready for whatever came next. "We must leave now," she said, her voice urgent. The fire crackled in the hearth, its glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. I could feel the weight of their fear, and for the first time in years, I realized that my quiet, solitary life was about to be shattered by something much bigger than myself. I could hear the hoofbeats growing. Louder, the shadows outside shifting as the figures drew closer. My heart raced, a cold sweat beating on my forehead as I looked to the women. The youngest one, the one with the soft voice, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. The older woman, though, was already moving, her body tense but purposeful. She looked at me for a moment, as if weighing her next words carefully, then spoke in a hushed tone. "They are coming for us." Her voice held no surprise, only a hardened resignation that sent a chill down my spine. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The leader of the three women, the one who had shown strength even in her silence, stepped forward. She didn't seem afraid. No, she seemed more determined, as if this was something she had been expecting all along. "We cannot stay here," she said, her voice low but firm. "They know we are here, and if we stay, we risk everything." "You risk everything." I nodded, though a part of me wanted to ask more questions. Who were these men? Why were they hunting these women? And most of all, why did they believe that my ranch, my quiet life, was part of the equation? But there was no time for questions. The sound of hooves was too close, and the urgency in the woman's voice made it clear that we had no choice but to act. "Grab what you can," I said, moving quickly towards the small pack of supplies I kept by the door. I turned to the women. "I'll take you to the creek. There's a spot where they won't be able to follow." The older woman nodded without a word, and the youngest one followed suit, though her trembling hands betrayed the fear she was trying to hide. The leader gave me one last look, her dark eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. I wasn't sure if it was gratitude, trust, or something darker, but she didn't hesitate. She followed the others without a word. As we moved toward the back door, the noise outside grew louder. The riders were here. I could see the shadows now, figures moving in the darkness, just outside the reach of the firelight. "Hurry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I led them through the back of the shack, down a narrow path that wound through the trees. The cold night air bit at my skin, but it was nothing compared to the pressure in my chest. What was I doing? Why was I helping these women, these strangers? My life had been simple before they showed up. Now it was anything but. We reached the creek a few minutes later, its water running cold and fast, a perfect cover for us to cross without leaving a trace. As I helped the women into the water, I looked back at the shack. I couldn't see the riders yet, but I knew they were close. It wasn't just that I could feel them. I could hear their voices now, raised in anger and frustration as they searched the shack. I didn't know how much longer we had before they realized we were gone. "We can't go back," I said to the women, my voice barely a whisper as I turned to face them. The leader nodded, her expression unreadable. "We won't," she said. "We never intended to stay." Her words sent a ripple of unease through me. What did she mean by that? Why had they come to my ranch in the first place? And more importantly, who were the men chasing them? The youngest woman looked at me, her face full of gratitude and fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky. "We won't forget what you've done for us." I nodded, but the words felt hollow. This was just the beginning, and I had no idea where it would end. We crossed the creek and made our way into the dense forest on the other side. The trees were thick, the underbrush so dense it was hard to see more than a few feet in front of us. But in the darkness, it didn't matter. We moved quietly, staying as hidden as possible. The woman's words from earlier echoed in my mind. We never intended to stay. What had they meant by that? And why had they been running in the first place? As we pushed through the trees, the sound of hooves faded into the distance. For a moment, I thought we might have made it, thought we might have escaped. But then, through the trees ahead of us, I saw them. A group of riders, silhouetted against the moonlight, moving steadily toward us. My heart sank. They had found us. My blood ran cold as I looked back at the women. The leader of the group looked at me, her eyes steady, but the fear was there. It was in the way she clenched her jaw, in the way her hand hovered over the knife at her side. This wasn't just a chance encounter anymore. We were being hunted, and I had no idea how we were going to get out of this alive. I held my breath as the riders approached, their silhouettes growing sharper in the moonlight. I could feel the weight of their presence, the tension in the air thick and suffocating. The women behind me were silent, their eyes wide with fear, yet there was something else there too, a quiet resolve. They had known this moment would come. I could tell by the way they moved, the way they braced themselves for the inevitable confrontation. The leader, her hand still resting near the knife at her side, glanced over her shoulder at me. "Stay calm," she whispered. "We've faced worse." Her words were meant to reassure, but they only heightened the sense of danger that now seemed to grip the forest. The riders were close now, too close. I could make out their faces, their stern expressions, and the gleam of steel in the moonlight. They were not just riders, they were hunters, and we were the prey. I could feel the pressure building inside me, my thoughts racing as I weighed my options. Should I run, leave the women to their fate, and try to escape on my own? Or should I stand and fight, knowing that the odds were stacked against us? The decision was taken out of my hands when the lead rider raised his hand, signaling for the group to stop. His gaze locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You've got something that belongs to us," the man called out, his voice low and rough, carrying an edge of authority. I didn't recognize him, but there was something about his presence that made me uneasy. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, trying to sound confident, though my heart was hammering in my chest. "These women are just passing through." The man snorted, his eyes narrowing. "Don't lie. We know they're hiding something, something valuable. And you're protecting them. His words were like a slap in the face. How did he know? Who were these people? My mind was spinning, but there was no time to dwell on it. I had to act. I stepped forward, trying to block the women from view, my body tense, ready for whatever came next. You're making a mistake, I said, my voice firm. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The man's gaze flickered briefly to the women behind me, then back to me, a cruel smirk forming on his lips. It's not a mistake, he said. You're involved whether you like it or not. If you don't hand them over, there will be consequences. His voice was calm, but the threat was unmistakable. I stood my ground, my hand instinctively moving toward the rifle slung over my shoulder. I won't let you take them. The moment I spoke those words, the air seemed to change. The other riders shifted in their saddles, their hands resting on their weapons, waiting for a signal. I knew then that if this turned into a fight, there would be no mercy. The leader of the women stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the man in front of me. You don't understand, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. What we have is not yours to take. It is sacred. The man's expression flickered for a moment, and I saw a trace of uncertainty in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same cold, calculating demeanor. I don't care what it is, he spat. It belongs to us now. I could feel the tension mounting, the standoff stretching into what felt like an eternity. The wind rustled through the trees, but it was drowned out by the pounding of my heart. In that moment, I realized that everything I had feared was happening. My quiet life, my solitary existence, was crumbling before my eyes. I had no choice but to stand and fight for these women, for the life I had never truly lived. If you want them, you'll have to go through me, I said, my voice barely a whisper but full of determination. The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might take the challenge. But instead, he waved his hand, signaling to his men. We'll give you one last chance to hand them over, he said, his voice like ice. Make your choice, rancher. It's your life or theirs. The words hung in the air, heavy with threat. I had no time to waste. The women were counting on me, and I couldn't let them down. My mind raced, trying to find a way out of this. But as the man's words echoed in my ears, I knew there was no escape. The only way out was through the fight that was about to come, and I would face it head on, no matter the cost. I stood there, my hand still on the rifle, my heart hammering in my chest. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt as if I could cut it with a knife. The lead rider's words still echoed in my ears, a chilling promise of what was to come if I didn't hand over the women. But there was no way I could do that. I couldn't let them take them. I had no idea what these men were after, but I wasn't about to let them destroy what little peace I had left. My mind raced. I glanced at the women behind me, their faces filled with fear, but there was something else in their eyes too, something that reminded me of the quiet resolve that had settled in me. They were counting on me. I couldn't let them down. The riders weren't going to wait forever. I could feel them closing in, their horses shifting restlessly beneath them. The man in front of me raised his hand, signaling his men to move forward. I tightened my grip on the rifle, ready to act. I warned you, the leader said, his voice now cold as ice. Step aside, rancher. You're out of your depth. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice low but firm. If you want them, you'll have to go through me. The man scoffed, his eyes narrowing in disdain. He motioned to one of his men, and before I knew it, the first rider was charging toward me, his weapon drawn. I had only a split second to react. I fired. The shot rang out, the sound echoing through the trees. And the rider's horse reared back, startled. The man fell off, landing hard on the ground, his weapon falling from his hands. For a moment, everything was still. The others hesitated, shocked by the sudden turn of events. But it didn't last long. The leader of the group waved his hand, and the rest of the riders spurred their horses forward, surrounding us. I knew I couldn't hold them off much longer. My heart raced, my mind screaming at me to think fast, to find a way out. But there was no escape. The women had nowhere to run, and I had no way to fight off 10 men. As the riders closed in, I felt a surge of panic, but then the woman who had led the group, the one who had been so calm earlier, stepped forward, her hand raised to stop me. Wait, she said, her voice sharp and commanding. She turned to the leader of the riders. You're making a mistake, she said. The leader scoffed, clearly unimpressed. And what would you know about it, he sneered. The woman's eyes never left his, her expression unyielding. You don't understand, she said quietly. What we have here is not yours to take. It's sacred, and if you try to take it, you'll regret it. The leader laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his eyes now. He seemed to hesitate, as if considering her words. But then, with a quick motion, he drew his gun and aimed it at her. I don't care what you think is sacred, he said, his voice filled with cold anger. This ends now. Before he could fire, I acted without thinking. I rushed forward, grabbing a nearby branch and swinging it at the rider's gun, knocking it out of his hands. The man stumbled back in surprise, but he quickly recovered, drawing a knife from his belt. The others moved in, ready to fight. But just as things were about to escalate, the woman stepped between us, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. Stop, she shouted. There's no need for more bloodshed. The riders hesitated, confused by her sudden command. For a moment, everything was still again. The woman looked at me, her eyes softening, but there was still an unmistakable determination in them. We don't want to fight, she said, her voice calm now. But if you don't understand what's at stake, there's nothing we can do. The leader of the riders stood there, his eyes narrowed, still unsure. It was clear now that he wasn't used to being challenged like this. The tension was unbearable. But then, slowly, he lowered his knife, and the riders followed suit. For a brief moment, there was silence, broken only by the sounds of the forest. But the tension had not lifted completely. I could feel it in the air, thick and heavy. You don't know what you're dealing with, the woman said again, her voice filled with an urgency that made my heart skip a beat. This is bigger than you. The leader looked at her for a long moment, his eyes calculating. He didn't speak, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. The silence stretched on, and I wondered what would happen next. Would he turn away, or would he push forward, willing to risk everything for whatever it was they were hiding? I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on us, the air so thick it was hard to breathe. The leader of the riders lowered his knife, but the tension didn't ease. His eyes were calculating, studying the woman in front of him, weighing her words. I stood there, my heart still racing, trying to make sense of the situation. What did she mean by "this is bigger than you"? I could see the wheels turning in the man's head, his sharp eyes flicking from her to me, then back to the other riders. He was trying to figure out whether to back down or push forward. The other men shifted uneasily, their hands still resting on their weapons, ready for anything. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for a signal, but I knew that whatever happened next wasn't just about me. It was about these women, about something I still didn't understand. The woman who had spoken stepped forward, her body language calm but firm. She wasn't afraid of them, not anymore. You don't know what you're dealing with, she said again, her voice steady but filled with urgency. What we have is not just something you can take. It's a part of us, of who we are. The leader of the riders stared at her for a moment longer, then finally spoke. I don't care what it is. It's ours now, whether you like it or not. He took a step forward, and I could see the resolve in his eyes. He wasn't going to back down, not without a fight. I stepped forward too, my hand resting on the rifle at my side. You don't get it, I said, my voice low but filled with the same determination. You don't get to just come in here and take what you want. This is my land. These women have nothing to do with your problems. The leader's eyes flicked to me, his gaze sharp and calculating. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but instead, he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Your land, he sneered. You think you can protect them? You're nothing but a rancher, an outsider. You don't know the first thing about what they're really hiding. His words stung, but I refused to let him see it. I stood my ground, not backing down. The woman glanced at me, a brief look of appreciation flashing in her eyes. But then, something changed. She turned to the others, speaking in a language I didn't understand. The words were quick, urgent, as if they were making plans without me. The riders seemed to understand, their expressions darkening as the woman's voice grew more insistent. I didn't know what she was saying, but I knew it was important. She finished speaking and turned back to the leader of the riders. You don't understand, she said, her voice soft but filled with a quiet power. You think you can just take this from us, but you don't know what you're dealing with. The leader scoffed, clearly uninterested in whatever she was saying. I know enough, he said. Enough to take what I want. and there's nothing you can do to stop me." But the woman didn't flinch. She stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. "You don't understand the consequences," she said again, her voice steady and calm. "If you take this from us, you'll never be able to go back. You'll be marked, hunted, just like we have been." For the first time, I saw something flicker in the man's eyes. A flash of uncertainty, of doubt. He hesitated, and I could tell that her words had gotten under his skin. The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of what was about to happen. The other riders stood still, their hands twitching nervously at their sides. But the leader didn't move. He was stuck, torn between greed and fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You're bluffing," he said, his voice low. "You don't scare me." The woman smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a grim, knowing smile. "We don't need to scare you," she said softly. "But we can make you wish you had never come here." There was a sudden movement behind me, and I turned just in time to see one of the riders draw his weapon. In a flash, I spun around, my hand going to my own rifle, but before I could raise it, the leader held up his hand. "No," he said sharply, his voice filled with command. "We're not doing this. Not here." I watched as the rider lowered his weapon, clearly frustrated. The leader turned back to the woman, his expression unreadable. "You've made your point," he said, his voice tight. "But don't think this is over. We'll be back." With that, he turned his horse and signaled to the others. Slowly, reluctantly, they all followed him, leaving the clearing in silence. As they disappeared into the trees, I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath the entire time. The woman stood still, her face expressionless, but I could see the relief in her eyes. She had won this round. But something told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. We had only bought ourselves a little time. Time that was running out fast. I watched as the riders disappeared into the trees, their horses moving slowly, their bodies tense. For a brief moment, the forest felt quiet again, but I knew it wouldn't last. The woman who had led the group stood still, her posture relaxed but her eyes scanning the surroundings. She had the air of someone who was always alert, even in moments of apparent calm. "We bought ourselves some time," she said quietly, not turning to look at me. "But that doesn't mean we're safe." I nodded, still trying to catch my breath after the standoff. My mind was racing. What had just happened? What was it that they were after? And why had they come to my ranch? I had more questions than answers, and it felt like every answer only raised more questions. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice rough from the tension. The woman finally turned to face me. Her expression was hard to read, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that made me realize that, for all her calm, she was just as worried as I was. "Now we move," she said firmly. "We don't have much time." I didn't argue. I didn't want to stay out here in the open for much longer. The danger was real, and I could feel it in my bones. "Where are we going?" I asked. "We need to get to a safer place," she replied. "There's a camp, not far from here. But it's hidden. Only a few people know where it is. We'll be safe there, for now." She paused, her gaze flickering to the others, who were now packing up their belongings. "We need to move quickly. They'll be back." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. I didn't ask any more questions. I simply nodded, and we began to move. The others followed, staying close as we made our way deeper into the forest. The path was narrow, the underbrush thick with twisted branches and thick roots that seemed to reach up from the ground to trip us. But the women moved effortlessly, their eyes scanning the darkness as they led the way. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me, each step feeling heavier than the last. The forest was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We walked for what felt like hours, the only sounds the crunch of leaves beneath our boots and the occasional rustle of the trees. It was almost too quiet. And then, finally, we reached the clearing. It wasn't much, just a small patch of land surrounded by thick trees. In the center, a fire pit sat, empty for now, but ready for use. "This is it," the woman said, her voice almost a whisper. "We'll stay here for the night." The others set to work immediately, gathering wood for the fire, while I took a seat near the edge of the clearing. My eyes kept scanning the trees, my senses on edge. The silence felt heavier now, more suffocating. I didn't trust it. The woman sat beside me, her eyes distant as she stared into the fire. "You don't know what you're involved in, do you?" she asked suddenly, her voice low. I turned to look at her, unsure of what she meant. I don't understand, I said. What do you mean? She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. What we're running from isn't just a few men on horseback. It's a whole system, a network of people who have been hunting us for years. It's not just about us anymore. It's about something much bigger. She looked at me then, her gaze piercing. And now, you're a part of it. You can't turn back. My stomach churned as I tried to make sense of what she was saying. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I asked, my voice tight. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked away, her gaze distant once again. We didn't have time, she said quietly. And we didn't want to drag you into it. But you're already involved, whether you like it or not. The weight of her words sank in. I had known this was more than just a simple encounter, but I hadn't fully realized the extent of it. I was in deeper than I had thought, and now, there was no turning back. As the fire crackled in the center of the clearing, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. I wasn't just helping strangers anymore. I was part of something that had the potential to change everything. The air felt heavier, thicker now, and I couldn't help but wonder what was really at stake here. What were these women hiding? What was the enemy after? And most importantly, why had I become a part of it? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. The journey ahead would be far more dangerous than anything I had ever imagined. The night stretched on, the shadows growing longer as the firelight flickered, and I knew that soon, we would have to face whatever was waiting for us in the dark. I woke up to the sound of crackling firewood and the soft rustling of the trees in the breeze. The fire had burned low overnight, leaving only embers glowing faintly. The cold of the night had settled into my bones, but there was no time to linger. We couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. The women were already stirring, gathering their things, preparing for what lay ahead. The air was still thick with tension, a quiet anticipation hanging over us all. I sat up, stretching my stiff limbs, and glanced at the woman who had led us through the forest. She was kneeling beside the dying fire, her face shadowed by the flickering light. I could see the lines of worry etched into her features, the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on her. As she caught me watching her, she gave me a brief nod, as if acknowledging my silent question. "We move now," she said, her voice quiet but commanding. I didn't question it. I knew better by now. We didn't have the luxury of time. The others were already moving, packing up quickly and efficiently. I stood up, my legs aching from the long hours of walking the day before. The forest was still, the only sound now the rustling of leaves beneath our boots. We made our way through the trees, the path narrower than before, winding deeper into the woods. I felt a strange sense of urgency now, a feeling that we were being hunted, though I couldn't see anyone or hear anything. But it didn't matter. The danger was real, and I could feel it closing in on us. As we moved further into the forest, the trees began to thin out, and the landscape shifted. The ground became rockier, the air more chilled. The woman in the lead glanced back at me, her expression unreadable. "We're almost there," she said, her voice still low but steady. "Keep your eyes open." I nodded, scanning the area around us. The terrain was difficult, but it was also beautiful, the rugged landscape offering no sign of human presence for miles. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch or the call of a distant bird. But as we continued, something shifted. A low rumble reached my ears, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. I stopped in my tracks, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle at my side. The others stopped too, their faces tense, their eyes darting around. The noise grew louder, and then I saw it, a group of riders, their horses galloping toward us, dust rising in the air. My heart skipped a beat. It was them, the men who had been hunting us. I didn't have time to think. I turned to the woman in the lead. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice tight. She didn't hesitate. "We run," she said, her voice steady despite the danger. "Head for the river. It's our only chance." Without another word, she turned and started running, her feet barely touching the ground as she moved with speed and purpose. The others followed, and I quickly fell and stepped behind them, my heart pounding in my chest. We ran, our feet pounding against the rocky earth, the sound of the riders growing louder behind us. I could hear their horses closing in, feel the heat of their pursuit on my back. I had no idea how far the river was, but I knew it was our only hope. As we ran, I glanced back. The riders were gaining on us, their horses moving faster now, driven by the promise of capturing us. I pushed myself harder, my legs aching, my lungs burning for air. The river was still a distant memory, but it was all I could think about now. The river meant safety, or at least a chance to escape. We were close, I could feel it. The trees began to thin, and I could hear the sound of rushing water in the distance. A surge of hope flooded through me. We could make it, just a little further. But the riders weren't giving up. I could hear them shouting now, urging their horses forward, closing the gap between us. The woman in the lead didn't look back. She was focused, determined. She knew we had to reach the river, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get us there. I followed her, my mind racing, my body exhausted but driven by the desperate need to survive. The river was so close now, I could almost taste the coolness of the water. The sound of the rushing current grew louder, and I pushed myself faster, ignoring the pain in my legs. We were almost there. But just as I thought we might make it, a shout rang out from behind us. "Stop! You can't escape." The voice was harsh, full of anger, and I knew that the riders were closing in. I could hear their horses pounding the earth, the sound of hooves getting closer with every passing second. I turned to look back, my heart sinking as I saw one of the riders break away from the group, charging straight for us. Without thinking, I pulled the rifle from my side and aimed it at the rider, my finger tightening on the trigger. I didn't want to kill anyone, but there was no choice. We had no time left. The rider was close now, too close, and I fired. The shot rang out, loud and sharp in the still air. The rider jerked back, his horse rearing in surprise, but the man didn't fall. He was still coming, still charging toward us. I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest. But before I could react, the woman in the lead turned around and raised her hand, signaling for us to stop. "We don't kill," she said firmly, her voice calm but filled with authority. I froze, the rifle still in my hands. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "We can't just let them take us." She looked at me, her eyes steady. "We don't kill," she repeated. "We survive." I lowered the rifle, my fingers still tingling from the tension of the shot. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the forest, and for a moment, everything felt impossibly still. The rider I had aimed at was still mounted, his horse rearing in the air, but the man didn't fall. He looked at me, his face twisted with surprise, then back at the woman who had led us. Her hand was still raised, signaling for calm. The riders had slowed, their eyes darting nervously between us, but none of them were advancing. I was still breathing heavily, the adrenaline coursing through me, but I knew this wasn't over. The woman who had been guiding us turned to face me, her expression unwavering. "We don't kill," she repeated, her voice firm. "We survive, and killing them will make us no better than those who hunt us." I wanted to argue, to say that we didn't have time for rules, that the riders would only come back, more prepared, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She was right. Killing them would only escalate the situation. We didn't have that luxury anymore. "We survive," I repeated to myself, almost as a mantra, trying to find some semblance of understanding in her words. The riders were still staring at us, but the leader, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke. "You can't run forever," he said, his voice colder now. "You think you can hide from us, from what you've done. We'll find you, no matter where you go." The woman didn't flinch. "You'll never find what you're looking for," she said calmly, her voice carrying a weight of finality. The leader hesitated, his eyes narrowing as if considering something. Then, with a sharp motion, he gestured to his men. "Get back," he ordered. "We'll leave for now, but this isn't over. Mark my words." He turned his horse, and one by one, the riders followed. The sound of hooves faded as they retreated, leaving us standing in the clearing, still trembling from the near confrontation. The woman didn't say anything for a long while, her gaze fixed on the path the riders had taken. She seemed lost in thought, as though contemplating the next step. I finally broke the silence. "What now?" I asked. She turned to me, her face softening for the first time. "Now we move. We can't stay here any longer. We have to keep moving, keep hidden, until we can find a place where they won't find us." I nodded, understanding the urgency. "And what about them? The riders?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with the weight of everything she had seen. "They'll come back. They always do. But we will be ready. We have to be." The words hung heavy between us, but I knew there was no other choice. We were in this together now. The next few hours passed in a blur as we packed up, ready to leave the safety of the forest behind. The woman led us through a series of hidden trails, the path winding and twisting as we moved deeper into the wilderness. The forest began to change around us, thicker, darker, more oppressive, as if the land itself were pushing us away. We walked in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, but the tension was still there, lingering in the air like a storm about to break. As the sun began to dip low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the land, we finally arrived at a small, secluded cave. The woman turned to me, her expression grave. "This is where we rest," she said softly. "It's not much, but it will do for now." We set up camp, the fire crackling softly in the darkness. But even as we sat around the warmth of the flames, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting for us. Something that would find us no matter where we went. The woman, still lost in her thoughts, finally spoke again. "You don't know what you're involved in," she said quietly, her voice full of a sadness I hadn't heard before. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about something bigger, something that's been hidden for a long time. And now, it's coming for all of us." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't understand the full extent of what we were up against, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear that had been growing since the moment they first appeared at my ranch. "What are we up against?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "You'll understand soon enough," she said softly. "But for now, just know this, you're part of something now, and you'll have to choose where you stand when the time comes." Her words were cryptic, and I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I could feel the weight of them. We were all standing on the edge of something, and when it all came to a head, we would have to make a choice that would change everything. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the cave walls, but in my heart, I could feel the darkness closing in. We weren't safe yet, not by a long shot.